Hey everybody, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Once again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. My name is Dan Sfera, and I'm coming to you from theclinicaltrialsguru.com, which, by the way, is the internet's best place for clinical trials content and information, interviews. We do our best to bring you guys videos, discussions, interviews with guest gurus, what we call guest gurus, things like that. Today's video post is inspired by an interview I conducted yesterday with Etienne Thomas. Etienne is the CEO and founder of clinicaltrialselect.org. It's a search engine that focuses on clinical trials for life-threatening medical conditions such as lung cancer, AIDS, some forms of diabetes, things like that, autoimmune diseases, things like that are very important. And what he mentioned and what this post is going to be talking about today is how physicians sometimes may be resistant to clinical trials for various different reasons that oftentimes don't have that much to do with your health. So what Etienne brought up was the biggest problem with clinical trials, and he's talking about the life-threatening medical condition clinical trials. I'm talking about clinical trials in general, just all across the board. The biggest problem is like a huge disconnect between the physicians that conduct clinical trials and the physicians that have private practices who happen to not conduct clinical trials. So for the most part, this is usually how it works. 80% of the time, if we use the 80-20 rule here, 80% of physicians that do research, they do only research, and 80% of physicians who do just private practice medical care do not conduct clinical trials, although the number for that might be even higher. But Etienne, if you watch that interview, it's very interesting. I encourage all you guys to go watch it. Just do a search on our blog for Clinical Trial Select, and you'll find that video. But Etienne brought up some interesting figures. He said that for all the life-threatening medical conditions out there, it's statistically proven that clinical trials are the best alternative for about 42% of those people. Now, clinical trials are only offered 3% of the time by the physician of that patient. And Etienne believes that this is because the patient's physician is usually not involved in clinical trials. So therefore, he's kind of a little skeptical and hesitant to refer someone to a clinical trial. Number one, and Don talks about this all the time, that physician may be scared of losing you to another doctor. And, this is a business. You are something that physician bills for, obviously. So if he loses you, it's like he's losing money. And another reason is the fact that obviously that particular physician may not be comfortable with clinical trials because he doesn't understand clinical trials that well. So he'll oftentimes offer you different alternatives, but rarely clinical trials. And Etienne says 3% of the time, clinical trials. So it's statistically proven, according to Etienne, that clinical trials for these life-threatening conditions would be the number one best choice 42% of the time. Yet clinical trials are only offered 3% of the time. So that's 38% of people that are not benefiting from what would be the best alternative. My message here is not for everyone to join a clinical trial. My message is not for physicians to start referring all their patients to clinical trials. That's not what I'm getting at. But what I am getting at is that physicians need to understand that clinical trials should be considered as an alternative, especially in these life-threatening medical condition clinical trials. Sometimes they are the best alternative. Again, 42% of the time, they're proven to be the best alternative. And if you need me to find out how Etienne got to that number, I'll ask him. But he seems to know his stuff. He seems to have done his homework. He's been doing this for a long time. I believe him. Makes sense to me. At least from my own experiences, I've seen clinical trials benefiting a lot of people. So 42% seems about right. So anyways, there's a huge disconnect between the physicians that are conducting clinical trials that don't have private practice patients and the physicians that are not conducting clinical trials that do treat their patients. they're not referring enough people to clinical trials for many different reasons. Biggest reason is fear. They don't want to lose their patients to another doctor for clinical trials, which they don't really understand exactly how it works. They're scared they're going to lose you from their practice, and you know, they I coined this term, uh, clinical trials demystified. That's the ebook I have. It's called Demystifying Clinical Trials, or Clinical Trials Demystified, however you want to call it. But it's obvious that clinical trials, there's still like a huge stigma behind it, and it's not just from the general public. It also comes from the physicians. And the interview I had yesterday with Eddie and kind of enlightened me. And Don talks about this all the time, but it is true. I mean, the majority of the physicians that are out there do not conduct clinical trials. Therefore, they don't feel comfortable referring their patients to clinical trials. And all Eddie is trying to say, and I'm kind of echoing him here and getting behind him and supporting him in his message, is that many times the best alternative would be a clinical trial, especially in these life-threatening conditions. And these these uh, these patients are not being offered that alternative because of fear from their physicians. So I recommend that you, as a patient, you need to ask your doctor, especially if you're in one of these situations as a life-threatening medical condition or a disease that requires immediate medical attention, and you've tried other treatments out there, to give clinical trials at least some type of consideration. Because in 42% of the times, it may be your best alternative. So if you do your homework as a patient, you use Edian's search engine or any search engine, but I recommend Edian's because it's got all the information there readily available for you to print out and take to your doctor physically. But do your homework, research your medical condition, research new clinical trials that are out there, and then bring it up to your doctor, because if you don't, your doctor may never bring up clinical trials as an alternative. And in many cases, 42% of the time, clinical trials would be the best alternative for these patients. So just something to think about. Do your homework. Ask your doctor lots of questions. Ask your doctor about clinical trials. If he's hesitant to even talk about it, ask him why. Ask him if he's done clinical trials. Ask him for a good reason why he doesn't want you to join a clinical trial. Don't just settle for any answer. Ask him why. Specifically, why would this clinical trial not be right for me? You got to ask, because 42% of the time, clinical trials for life-threatening medical conditions is proven to be the best alternative. Now, I'm not suggesting every doctor needs to refer all their patients to a study. That's not what I'm trying to say. But many times, clinical trials are ignored when they shouldn't be. Hope this helps. Let me know what you guys think. It's www.theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, it's theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thanks a lot.